Hello everybody, welcome back to Peregrine Prude. I'm your rambling host, Colby Matthews, and I did not get a video posted last week. I was extremely busy with many things, so I said I would endeavor to try to put one out every week, but sometimes that endeavor and that wanting to falls flat, and I'm even late getting this out into the second week, so I probably won't actually get it posted until early into the third week. So anyways, here we are, and we're going to continue looking at quotes and my comments about those quotes for the Gothic novel Melmoth the Wanderer by Charles Maturin. It's a wonderful Gothic novel. This is part 2 of 2. If you would like to see the first part, well then please find part 1 of 2 on my channel. And without further ado, just a moment. This video is brought to you by Preparation H Hemorrhoidal Ointment. If you ever have any hemorrhoids in your hind nether regions, then a little Preparation H will do the trick. This video is actually brought to you by Preparation H. Well, I mean, it's not brought to you in the sense that they're sponsoring or giving me money in any kind of way. It's brought to you in the sense that I'm able to sit down in this chair without excruciating pain, thereby going over this material. So in that sense, Preparation H is bringing you this video. I jest. Now, I did buy this for myself a few years ago. This is maybe too much information, but that's kind of how I roll sometimes. And I haven't had to use it, thankfully. Haven't had to use it just but that one occasion. So I am 41 years old, so nothing should surprise anybody about that. Alrighty. We are well into it. I thought we had gotten about more. I thought we had gotten closer to halfway at the end of part 1, but it looks like we're not quite halfway. So let's just go into it. All right. Minutes are hours in the noctuary of terror. Terror has no diary. If I remember correctly, this line was my introduction to the excellent word noctuary. And a noctuary, if you don't already know, it's just the opposite of a diary, right? A diary is a record of what happens during the day. And on the flip side, a noctuary is a record of what happens at night. So it's like, nocturnal is an adjective describing things or happenings that are happening at night, active at night. Whereas diurnal is the opposite of nocturnal. Diurnal describes animals, describes happenings, events happening in the daytime. So noctuary is the opposite of a diary. Minutes are hours in the noctuary of terror. Terror has no diary. I just thought that was a cool line. Those who tell us the whole of our calamity always appear malignant. For our hearts or our imaginations always flatter us that it is not so great as reality proves it to be. Truth is told us by any mouth sooner than our own. So this last part of this quote, I think I had given you that in the introduction. Those who tell us the whole of our calamity always appear malignant, for our hearts or our imaginations always flatter us that it is not so great as reality proves it to be. So sometimes we don't really fully comprehend the vastness, the totality of the calamity that we are truly in. This could be just at times with temporal things in life, or this could be in the sense of like total depravity that the unregenerate, the unsaved heart is in before salvation or outside of salvation. So you can kind of look at it from like temporal calamity, consequences of earth and of man, or eternal spiritual calamity. And the people that tell us the totality of the calamity that we are in, they seem as if they're being malignant, as if they're being hateful and hurtful, just simply to be hateful and hurtful. Because our hearts, like we're naive, right? We're ignorant. We kind of love our ignorance. We relish in our naivety of God's truth. We flatter our hearts flatter us that it's not that bad. When really, at times, the people who tell us the whole of our calamity, these could be evangelists, people who are speaking truth to us, God's truth to us through the Word, and maybe they're the ones that are really loving us by telling us the whole, the totality, the all-encompassing nature of our calamity. Maybe they are the ones that are really loving us, and maybe they're not being malignant really at all. Maybe they are being the most, not even benign. Maybe they are just the only ones loving us in this world, really. But oftentimes we don't take it as that because we don't want to hear of our calamity. We want to be ignorant of how total that it is. In early youth, superiority of depravity always seems like a superiority of power. With reverence, with a prostituted idolatry, those who have passed through the degrees of vice before us. This man was a criminal, and crime gave him a kind of heroic immunity in my eyes. Premature knowledge in life is always to be purchased by guilt. He knew more than I did. He was my all in this desperate attempt. I dreaded him as a demon, yet I invoked him as a god. Oh man, as a red-blooded American male who has passed through my late teens and early 20s and late 20s and all that, yeah, I can attest to the veracity of this. There comes a point, and hopefully it doesn't happen to everybody, but I think it probably happens to most. Even though I grew up as a Christian, I grew up in the church, and I truly believed, I also truly fell away. Not in the sense that I lost my salvation, but I just had a fairly long season of utter rebellion. Even though looking back on it now, I still believe I was in the faith and God was keeping me. He was just letting me run. He was letting me run to the end of my chain. And I sure did. But nevertheless, that being said, yeah, what he's saying here is that among youth, and I would say it's especially true among males, not that it doesn't happen among females, but I think it's probably more prevalent among males. They tend to be more cultish whenever they're competitive, whenever they're with one another, and competitive in, to every purpose. They are competitive. So sometimes whenever you're in that state of rebellion, that rebellious spirit, you want to you want to just continually keep one-upping your peers in depravity. Like you brag about how much you've done, how much sin you've accomplished, and what degrees you have taken it to. So yeah, that's definitely a reality in certain cultures and certain groups of friends. That I was well within that in my early and mid 20s, early 20s for the most part. Premature knowledge in life is always to be purchased by guilt, right? We saw that in the Garden of Eden. Premature knowledge, it's always purchased by guilt. And I think, in a sense, we can kind of see this in popular culture with the general fascination with true crime. Now, I must say that in the last few months to a year, I've been watching a lot more true crime things on TV and YouTube. I find that interesting, but I find it interesting as kind of an insight into human nature, and I find it interesting at the spiritual level, at the psychological level, and I'm very careful that whenever I watch these true crime things and just how base, like utterly evil human nature can be, and the acts that it can perpetuate, I'm always careful to be looking down on it, right? As if like I'm on a higher spiritual plane and I'm looking down into hell. I think it's okay to do that. Well, what we have to be careful is whenever we're enjoying anything like this, whether it be a horror movie or learning about mythologies of the past or past cults or current cults, if we're studying about things like this just from a purely academic or just interest, just pure curiosity, um, we have to make sure that we're not looking up to it as an idol. So it's okay to enjoy true crime just as information gathering, and just out of curiosity and finding these things out for information to know what has happened, as long as we're looking down, as if we're looking down into hell. But when we want to make sure that true crime doesn't become our heaven, it doesn't become an idol or a god, that's when we need to stop it, stop watching it, or just make sure we adjust our perspective. Here I also wanted to I have a comment here that says pay for sin on the back end or pay for righteousness up front. We're kind of confronted with this choice. As Christians, we either accumulate sin and we enjoy that sin here in the moment, that fleeting enjoyment here in the moment, and then we pay for it. Well, I say as non-Christians, and you pay for it on the back end, that is in eternity. So minimum pleasure, short-term pleasure, fleeting pleasure of sin in the here and now, eternal damnation. Or you can pay for righteousness here in this earth. You can pay for it up front. You can try to be righteous and serving God here in the here and now in this life, and you can take all the punishment and the persecution that may come along with that, but then you get the reward on the back end. For some reason, that quote made me put that comment. I don't see the clear connection right now, but there was a connection at one time. I question where there is a more horrible situation than that in which we cling to each other's hate instead of each other's love, in which at every step of our progress we hold a dagger to our companion's breast and say, if you falter for a moment, This is in your heart. Right? There are some relationships that are their binding force, their fraternizing force is hate. I mean, just think about racists. Um, any kind of racist movement throughout history, it's two-pronged, I would say. It's in part, um, it's bound by an inordinate affection, even possibly a love for the in-group. Right? The in-group, there's too much focus on that exclusivity of the in-group, and then that manifests itself by an exclusion of any outside group, or maybe even just certain specific outside groups. So it's two-pronged. It's a perversion of love, the exclusive love for the in-group, and then also a hatred of whatever outside group they may be focused on. But then on another way to look at this quote, to think about it, is that a lot of people, like whenever I in any way communicate that a certain thing, that God says that a certain thing is sin, some people say, well, some Christians say, well, I don't want to be. I've said this before in another video. I don't want to be known for what I'm against. I just want to be known for what I'm for. But that is such a cop out, because if you're anybody who's for anything, is gonna necessarily be against other things, and it's not a matter of you gotta focus on all of it. You can't just say, you can't be a hypocrite. You can't you got to make sure you use the same measure of judgment for yourself and for everybody. And that judgment is not your own personal judgment. That judgment must be informed by the Word of God. So we got to be careful of that. We are judges. We are to examine everything and judge everything according to God's Word, and apply that same judgment to ourselves. So to be, it's not a matter of being, I want to be known for what I'm for, not for what I'm against. Well, then, so that's just people who say that. They want to have the best of both worlds. They want to have the best of Christianity, and they want to have the best of secularism. They're just straddling that line. They got one foot in both worlds. They don't want to offend anybody, is what it comes down to. They want to be known what they're for, but if to be for something, to be for God, to be for Christ, is necessarily to be against sin, because God and Christ, same God, different persons, same God, are against sin. So to be for God, because God is against sin, is for you to be against sin. And even in the sin in your own life as well. You always got to apply your own self to the equation, of course, because you are in the equation. This is a good shorty. Misery grows ingenious in its own defense. Right? We've all been there. I think we've all caught ourselves in such outrageous self-justifications that even we recognized it at the time, where we try to justify and rationalize our own actions. That's what this is getting at. Misery grows ingenious in its own defense. They gave, for a moment, a kind of instinctive credit to my words, extorted by terror. But a moment after, I could perceive that I, and not my communication, was the object of that terror. They seemed to view me through a distorting atmosphere of mystery and suspicion. I can't think of an example, but it's just the idea that he was speaking to this group of people, and at first he thought they were in such awe of what he was actually saying, of the ideas and the words that he was communicating to them. But then in a moment, he realized that they weren't really awestruck or in terror of the ideas he was communicating. They were in terror of him himself, of his own perhaps dark, evil aspect. That would be frightening, I would think. I mean, even as the speaker, to realize that, oh my, they're not really reacting to what I'm saying. They're reacting in like a negative, fearful sense, fearful way to me. Like, that would be quite scary, even to the speaker, I would imagine. Perhaps it is amid the moments of despair that imagination has most power, and they who have suffered can best describe and feel. I think there's a lot of merit to this idea. There is a certain kind of power and artistic ability that comes out of suffering and within suffering. I'm not saying you have to suffer to get to that point, but I just think that in general it is valid to a great degree. And I think that we see this with a lot of musicians, a lot of artists. Period. They kind of a lot of people that have gone through a lot of things, a lot of suffering and trials and tribulations in their life. They tend to be able to convey and artistically convey and those ideas to other people, I think, more easily and with greater power and adeptness. But that being said, we have to be careful not to artificially invite such suffering and misery into our lives just for the sake of its artistic expression. I think a lot of once again musicians, actors, actresses. I'm sure they do this in pop culture. They go out seeking suffering and misery in order to just perpetuate its art. Like you're a blues man. Okay, what if you're happy now? Well, what do? Maybe you got to go back out and artificially drum up some suffering for yourself, so you can have the blues muse speak to you again, so you can once again perform the blues in the way that you want to or that you used to. I think that's a bad way to go about it. It's inauthentic, I would say. It's very artificial. On top of it, just simply being morally wrong. In the logic of the schools he was well versed, but in this logic of the heart and of nature he was ignorance itself. I think in this quote we see a little bit of the idea of the difference between IQ and EQ. IQ, intelligence quotient; EQ, emotional quotient. I think it's very important to have both. You want to have knowledge. You want to have it in here. You want to have it accessible as much as possible. But at the same time, you got to have that emotional quotient. um, to know when to bring it out, to know how to bring it out, and to know who to bring it out for, and when to we got to know when to be quiet as well, when to just know that you have a lot of information here, and sometimes it's very tempting just to puke all your info out onto someone that you think could benefit from it. But if you don't have that emotional quotient to know how to do that out of sincerity and love, um, and wisdom, then sometimes that won't be received in the way that you hope that it would be. And I'm very guilty of this one. Sometimes my emotional quotient is right there, and sometimes it's very, very not. I think as far as EQ and, well, IQ too, I'm very finicky. I'm very up and down on both of those. To these cities they resort nominally for security and protection, but really for the sole purpose to which their existence is devoted, that of aggravating its miseries by every ingenuity of refinement. For example, those who live in uncontrasted and untantalized misery can hardly feel it. Suffering becomes their habit, and they feel no more jealousy of their situation than the bat, who clings in blind and famishing stupefaction to the cleft of a rock, feels of the situation of the butterfly, who drinks of the dew and bathes in the bloom of every flower. But the people of the other worlds have invented, by means of living in cities, a new and singular mode of aggravating human wretchedness, that of contrasting it with the wild and wanton excess of superfluous and extravagant splendor. I think this quote exhibits kind of the Tower of Babel mentality, that oftentimes people come together to create for themselves a false sense of security, sure, but also to exacerbate their own misery and their own depravity. And I'm not against living in cities per se, but at the same time I recognize that the more of fallen humanity that you amass together in close quarters, the more likely you're going to have dynamite going off. You're going to have all these much more violence, much more bad things happening, more crime against each other. But the more you spread out fallen, depraved humanity, the less that is likely to happen. And this is why after the flood, one of the reasons after the flood, God told Noah and his family to disperse among the earth, to go and spread themselves out among the earth. Did they do that? No. The Tower of Babel ensued, and then God did that another way by confusing the languages. Now, I'm not against cities. They serve an important purpose, but unfortunately, I think in most of the world, and the U.S. is no exception, that cities they no longer serve the purpose for which they originated. Cities originally, and this book right here, it really laid it out for me, really why cities came to be and the importance of cities, but how they become just too much of an entity in their own right, instead of serving the countryside around them for which they were originally built. They were supposed to be like a center for which the surrounding rural areas and smaller towns, serving as satellites, to the city would come, and like a kind of a common ground, like marketplace and a meeting of ideas and goods. And that in the old days there weren't really a whole lot of people actually living full time in the cities. They would just come there and do their business, and then they would go back to their more rural homes. And there may be like some exceptions with like full-time bureaucrats and government workers who lived in the cities full-time, but they were generally the exception and not the rule. And this book right here, The Dynamics of World History by Christopher Dawson, this really laid this idea out about how cities have really become too important in and of themselves. And maybe I'll get to that book eventually in this channel. So I think it's really important to live in the country. I don't even like to live in a small town. I mean, I don't think it's not as bad as the city. I did live in a huge city in Korea for 5 years, and those were some of the five best years of my life, living in Changwon in South Korea. It was a wonderful city. I love that city. I didn't want to live the rest of my life there, but for those 5 years, it was great. It was great. I think that it was a very unique city, and so that went a long way for me praising it. If it had been another city, like I would never want to live in Seoul, the capital of Korea. I would never want to live in Busan, even though I love Busan. I love visiting Busan. Still, there's a clutter. There's a hecticness to Busan that I could not. It'd be very difficult to tolerate on a daily basis. But Changwon, though it was a big city, it was a planned city, and that really goes a long way for me. It was planned. It didn't grow organically, and for that reason, it's very spaced out. You got a lot of parks. The sidewalks are really wide, and it's just laid out very, very well. And I think that went a long way. The traffic flows well for the most part, and it's surrounded by nature. It's surrounded by these mountains that just, it's like a crescent. These mountains are just a crescent going all the way around it. From my apartment in the middle of the city, I could, I'm a runner. I would run to the base of the mountains, and then I would go up and I'd run on these trails. I wouldn't run all the way to the top of the mountain. I would hike. Not that good of a runner, but I would love it. I would love it. I could just go from the center and just on foot, I could be out in nature in just a matter of like 20 minutes. I could run to the mountains. It was awesome. Awesome, awesome. And I don't think you're going to necessarily have that in like Chicago or New York City. Yeah, New York City has Central Park, but come on. That's not really the same, is it? One point is plain. They all agree that the language of the book is love one another, while they all translate that language hate one another. But as they can find neither materials or excuse from that book, they search for them in their own minds, and there they are never at a loss. For human minds are inexhaustible in malignity and hostility, and when they borrow the name of that book to sanction them, the deification of their passions becomes a duty, and their worst impulses are hallowed and practiced as virtues. And I think that right here we see what happens whenever religion usurps relationship. Right? Whenever religiosity usurps true relationship with God and with other human beings. I think that the book that they're referring to is the Bible. The language is, the fundamental language of the Bible is love one another. But if you don't have a relationship with God, then if you encounter the Word of God, then the Bible, then you could very easily manipulate that Word of God into working itself out as hate one another, as many people do. And for human minds are inexhaustible in malignity and hostility. Yes, yes we are. We have an uncanny ability to invent new degradations and new combinations and new spins on sin. If we were only so versatile in our obedience to God and in the many ways that we could manifest that obedience, what a difference that would make. Sorry, get a little parched here. Sprite, 0 sugar. I prefer Canada Dry Ginger Ale, 0 sugar, but Sprite 0 sugar is pretty good too. All right. You have taught me the joy of grief. Before I saw you, I only smiled, but since I saw you, I weep, and my tears are delicious. He seemed like one conscious of agony of soul himself, yet inclined to sport with the agony of another's. This union of inward despair and outward levity is not unnatural. Smiles are the legitimate offspring of happiness. But laughter is often the misbegotten child of madness that mocks its parent to her face. What a way with words Maturin has here. Right. We see this a lot with comedians. We see this a lot with people who are just generally funny in nature. I like to think of myself as one among them. And I do know that sometimes I am at my most comedic when I'm most trying to avoid a more serious conversation. And a lot of time that goes on subconsciously or unconsciously. I'm at least conscious enough to know that happens with me. I mean, there are just times where some relationships, they're just built with other people, they're built on humor. They're built on that. And sometimes that can be a problem. That can be a problem once you develop that habit within a certain relationship of just humor. It may be difficult to break out of that whenever you feel the prodding of the Holy Spirit prodding you to break out of that cycle of mere comedy into something a little bit more serious. And so it's difficult. I find myself sometimes struggling with that. But at the same time, I don't want to just smile just because it's a social expectation. I don't want to laugh just because it's the social expectation. I think there is an argument that if you smile more, even if you force it, then it's likely that you will be happy. That kind of forced smiling could eventually it could actually change your mood. And I did notice this whenever I was teaching English in South Korea. Whenever I would go in front of a class, I kind of clicked. I changed. I went into performance mode because my natural personality is a little bit more introverted. I'm not really as outgoing as I needed to be whenever I was a teacher. And so I would kind of go into like performance mode, whereas as if I were on stage and I were acting. I wasn't my natural personality with when I am as I am with friends or family or whatever. And that's not really being fake. That's just kind of that's just working, right? That just you kind of got to do. Whenever you're working, you have to do what your work demands of you. Like even if you're uh, working at Lowe's or something, Lowe's Home Improvement Warehouse, you may not be one who, if they're not working, you would go up and ask somebody if they need help finding something, right? I mean, you're not going to maybe do that on your own, but because you're at work and you're getting paid, you're going to go and you're getting paid to ask to help people, then you're going to be more likely to help people because that's what you're getting paid for. That's your job. In the same way, I had to kind of go into my teaching persona, which is not necessarily and it's not necessarily I was being fake. It was just that I was bringing out a different aspect. That's probably a better way of looking at it. It wasn't like I wasn't being it wasn't like I was being somebody I'm not. It was just that I was drawing upon a different aspect of myself that I don't usually have to draw upon. So, how does that relate to this quote? Let me remember. Oh yeah, the not smiling. Yeah, but at the same time, that I kind of see both sides. If somebody says something that's funny and you don't think it's funny, are you supposed to laugh just because you don't want to hurt their feelings? I mean, this is assuming that it's not dirty. It's not a dirty joke. Like as a Christian, you don't want to laugh for that. But this is just assuming something that it's a clean joke. But somebody says something and it's not funny. Should you laugh just to be polite, or just not laugh and just be honest? Let your lack of laughter be honesty. However, I have found that I don't have that problem that often because whenever somebody says something that they want it to be funny and it falls utterly flat, I find that funny. And so I'm laughing, maybe they think I'm laughing with them, but really I'm laughing at them. So I'm laughing, but maybe not for the reason they think I am. But anyways, could that be a lie? I don't know. I don't know, if we have to get into that nitty gritty of honesty at that level. I mean, you're just laughing. So, yeah. Guess I overthink things sometimes a little too much. Or maybe not enough. All right. Before he came, everything loved me. And I had more things to love than I could reckon by the hairs of my head. Now I feel I can love but one, and that one has deserted me. Since I have seen him, all things have changed. The flowers have not the colors they once had. There is no music in the flow of the waters. The stars do not smile on me from heaven as they did, and I myself begin to love the storm better than the calm. Yeah. Anybody who's ever had their heart broken by a person that they love, I mean, especially in the romantic sense, then they definitely know what's being said here. And I myself begin to love the storm better than the calm. Yeah. I must say, I love summertime, and there's nothing, in my opinion, that beats a scorching, hot summer day. Call me crazy. I love hot sunny summer days. But a very close second for me is a summer thunderstorm at night. I love thunderstorms and rain. It's just so calming, so calming. And there's this quote that I've been trying to find. It was either by Chester. I'm pretty sure it's by Chesterton, but this is not verbatim. But there's something about. He says that there's something about being. He's speaking metaphorically. There's something about being in a storm, the storm of life. Whenever you're in Christ, and there's a certain peace and even pleasure that comes in being within that storm, that trial of life, that you almost enjoy the storm because you know that because you're in Christ that the ship will not be sunk. No matter how much it bellows and the waves toss and turn and lightning strikes and thunder rolls around you, no matter how terrible and frightening the storm, there's that abiding calm within you that knows that your ship is going to make it because your ship is Christ. And so in that sense, there is I think there's another resonation to, loving the storm better than the calm. And there's also a testing within the storm, right? Whenever it's too calm for too long, sometimes you become lazy in your obedience. You become lazy in your faith. You get distracted by things that come about produced by idle hands and idle minds. So the calm is nice, and whenever the calm comes, we need to make sure and we work. Just because it's calm doesn't mean it's rest. Now there's a time for rest, but of course, in long periods of calm in your life, when things are just going well, we got to make sure that we're working and learning and still obeying and practicing, so that when the storms do come, we have accumulated that wisdom and that knowledge and that fortitude to help to see us through. Like some bright and shivering spirit, who, for its further purification, or perhaps for the enlargement of the knowledge necessary for its destination, is compelled to witness some evidence of the Almighty's wrath, unintelligible in its first operations, but doubtless salutary in its final results. I think here we see the idea that the Lord disciplines those whom He loves. Right? We see like a bright, shivering spirit, like a person who is on fire for God. Not perfect, but on fire for God. And yet, even in their being aflame for God, God may want to purify them further, to enlarge their knowledge of Him further. And perhaps even in their imperfections, He wants to make them witness of His wrath, for the person's eventual good, and of course for God's glorification. Right? God's wrath is an important part, an important aspect of who God is. And God exercises His wrath for His glory and for the good of those who believe in Him eventually. And, as unintelligible as it might be in its first operations, such discipline received by somebody from God, it's doubtless salutary. It's doubtless with goodwill in its final results, eventually. Alas! How deceitful and inadequate we feel the language of man, after love and grief have made us acquainted with that of nature. The only one, perhaps, capable of a corresponding sign for those emotions under which all human expression faints. What a difference between words without meaning and that meaning without words, which the sublime phenomena of nature, the rocks and the ocean, the moon and the twilight, convey to those who have ears to hear. This quote puts me in mind of the sound of silence. Of course, originally recorded by Simon and Garfunkel. That is by far the inferior version, in my opinion. My wife and son are partial to The Sound of Silence by Pentatonics, and yeah, that's pretty good. But even though I'm not like a hard rock fan, I do love Disturbed's. Disturbed? So like the plural, Disturbed's version of The Sound of Silence. That one rocks, man. So if you get a chance, if you haven't heard it, search up The Sound of Silence by Disturbed. It's really good. I like that version a lot. But what he's talking about here is that, yeah, just human language, it can't convey what we want it to convey at times. And sometimes there's just simply this silence of the soul that we need to enjoy. And it's just between us and God. I think the verse that says, you know, even whenever we pray, that the Spirit, you know, we sometimes we groan. Our spirit groans with utterances that only, you know, Jesus can pick up on. That sometimes we have these longings, these deep longings, and that it's just these unheard groanings and utterances of our spirit that we can't even really put into words. We can't even really put into, you know, reasonable thoughts. That they're just there, and God hears those. And I think that's kind of what he's talking about here, but in a different attitude. That whenever we witness something so beautiful in nature, and it doesn't have to be nature necessarily, but I've been in places in this world where it's just overwhelming, the beauty of nature, and you can't put it into words. It's just such a special time that you get to share with, you know, you and God, and maybe even, you know, other people that are with you. What a bond, what a bonding force such an experience is. I think that's what this quote's kind of getting at here. I'm going to skip over some of these a little bit. Okay, here we go. My life formerly was all anticipation. Now it is all retrospection. The life of the happy is all hopes. That of the unfortunate, all memory. I think it's sad. This is sad but true for some people. I underline this verse not because it's the way it should be, but because it's the way it is, unfortunately, for some. And I think that Bruce Springsteen's Glory Days captures this idea very well. And also John Cougar Mellencamp's I'm not sure the name of the song, but there's a part of the chorus is life goes on long after the thrill of living is gone. Oh yeah, life goes on long after the thrill of living is gone. Yeah, can't think of the title, but anyways, that is true. That is true, but I think that it's true at times. But we always have to have hope. There's always hope. There's always got to be something that we're looking forward to, and as Christians, obviously that is heaven. That is eternal life in the presence of our God. But even in the shorter term, as Christians and even non-Christians alike, we got to have something we're looking forward to. There's always got to be some kind of mini goal or some kind of little something in our life that's coming up that we should be looking forward to with hope and anticipation. The best of our life, we can't think the best of us is behind us, because I think even by having that attitude and having that way of thinking brings it about. If we think the best of our life is behind us, well then it most likely is, because we're not open to new opportunities for the future that may bring out the best to come. Oh, okay, yeah. Here we go. She now had concentrated all her hopes, all her heart, no longer in the ambition to be loved, but in the sole wish to love. I got bingo exclamation mark with a star in the margins next to this one. Because this one was like a lightning flash in my brain when I read it. It pointed out to me that love, whenever you're in any kind of loving relationship, no matter what kind of love that may be, the primary thing is to love, not to be loved. Like you should be loved by the other, by your beloved. Like it is to be reciprocal. That is its perfect functioning, to be reciprocated constantly. However, even if it's not, it shouldn't matter. If you really love that person, you gotta keep on loving them, whether they love you back or not. Is that easy? Of course not. Does that take supernatural divine power to keep on doing that? Absolutely. But is that something that we should give up on if we find ourselves in that predicament? No. Now, when I say that, I'm primarily thinking about the husband-wife relationship. But that could be applied to any relationship. Now, having said that, I think that it is it's with friends, it's sometimes difficult, because there's different levels of friends as far as I look at it. Like there are people you hang out with that are more than acquaintances, but then there are friends, and it's difficult, especially whenever you move from time to time and you travel. And sometimes throughout life, your friends, they even if it's not due to a change of geography, sometimes friends, they come and they go. And I don't think that's necessarily being a bad friend. That's just the ebb and flow of life. Friends come and go. It's difficult. And I think that a lot of that is based upon interest, because a friendship needs, as we learned from C.S. Lewis, the Four Loves, A friendship, it needs to be about something. There has to be especially among men, a friendship, you got to have some kind of like focus that all the men can like be focused on, and that whatever that focus is, that is the bond that brings the friends together. And if that focus changes, if somebody's no longer focused on that campfire, or that peace pipe, or that whatever that totem, or that interest is, that is the binding force of the friendship, well then, yeah, then people just, they kind of disperse and they go their own way, and they find other fires to gather around. And I don't think that's necessarily being a bad friend. That's, I think most guys recognize that as a thing that happens. This is the marked graduation of a profound feeling. Language is no longer necessary to those whose beating hearts converse audibly, whose eyes, even by moonlight, are more intelligible to each other's stolen and shadowed glances than the broad converse of face to face in the brightest sunshine, to whom, in the exquisite inversion of earthly feeling and habit, darkness is light, and silence eloquence. So I think here you kind of have, whenever you're in such intimacy with another, you don't necessarily have to talk as much. That's what that's basically saying in much more beautiful language. Now, that being said, it's still vitally important to communicate to those who you're in a relationship with. That's not saying you never talk, because you're so close you don't ever need to audibly communicate or otherwise communicate specific details. It's just saying that you don't have to quite as much. There's like, the longer you live with somebody, the longer you're in a relationship with somebody, you're just kind of on the same wavelength. And I think Keith Whitley's song, I hope you guys enjoy these musical references, because Keith Whitley is just, he's a legend. Absolute legend. You say it best when you say nothing at all, right? Yeah. I think there's a lot to that. You say it, how's the rest of that go? The light, oh man. Oh man. Wish I could remember the rest of those lyrics. Anyways, talking about how this girl he loves and who loves him, he can just tell that how much she loves him by the light in her eyes, the whatever else he says about the way he can tell that she loves him that much. So I actually really played this song a lot whenever Eunjung and I first started dating in Korea, because I could tell she loved me and she liked me, but at the same time she was more hesitant. And when I say more hesitant, I mean she was wiser to wait to tell me that she loved me. I kind of like sprung it on her a little bit early, and she was a little freaked out by that. Hey. And she waited longer to tell me, but I consoled myself with Keith Whitley's song, "You Say It Best When You Say Nothing at All," because I could tell she loved me, but she just wasn't quite ready to say the words yet. And then after we had been married for like about 5 or 6 years, she finally told me. No. Okay. Perhaps by that mysterious conviction impressed on the hearts of those who love profoundly, that passion must always be united with suffering, and she seemed to hear, with a kind of melancholy submission to the fatality of love, that her lot was to suffer from lips that were sure to verify the oracle. Sometimes people, they have such a hard time finding the right relationship. It seems like they're forever destined to be burned and to be heartbroken in certain ways, at least. But at the same time, I think this shows the importance of long suffering, and this is something that is increasingly foreign to our culture. The concept of long suffering. I mean, long suffering, in my book, that's almost a synonym for love. You're willing to suffer something or some idea, or especially some person, for a long time. You're willing to put up with them and love them even though they make you suffer. I mean, that is love. That is love. Long suffering, hashtag love, you know. Mm, 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 mm. Oh, here's a good one. Thus always, to the unhappy, the very fulfillment of their morbid wishings becomes a source of disappointment. And the change they hoped for is desirable only if it gives them cause to long for another change. In the morning they say, "Would God it were evening." Evening comes, and in the evening they say, "Would God it were morning." Yeah. This is the idea that those who would be discontent find discontentment anywhere and everywhere. Right? Contentment is not found in our situation, in our circumstance, in our environment. Contentment is a choice. It is a choice to be discontent or content. Sure, your situation may make that choice easier or harder by degree of whatever situation you are in at any given moment, but that does not take away the fact and the truth that you are either discontent or you are content by your own choice. It is a matter of the heart. It is a matter of the focus of the mind. Jonah could have chosen to be content in the belly of the whale on the bottom of the ocean. Warren Buffett can be, let's choose somebody different. Elon Musk can be discontent if for any number of reasons, and I would actually argue he has manifold more reasons to be discontent than I do. I think to be a wealthy person invites much more trouble, much more cause for discontent and greed than being poor. The key to contentment is not having more. The key to contentment is being satisfied with less. That is the truth. That's not a Bible verse. That is once again from G.K. Chesterton. However, it distills many Bible verses into that one simple line. The certainty of evil had given them a kind of courage. Suspense is the only evil against which it is impossible to set up a defense. And like young mariners in an untried sea, they almost felt ready to welcome the storm. as a relief from the deadly and loathsome sickness of anxiety. Yeah, certainly. I mean, we certainly see this with in a tangible sense with soldiers in the trenches who know that enemy soldiers are just over the field in the other trenches, and that a battle is could happen at any moment. But it's like they're sick with anxiety and they're sick with the waiting because they know it's coming and they are ready for it. They've made every kind of fortification, everything. They're ready for it, and they are, even though the battle's delay may extend their life, perhaps the battle's delay kind of it preys upon their sanity. It preys upon their hearts and minds because they just want it to be over already. Just let it come, let it come. And I think a lot of what people call PTSD, it comes from that waiting, from that inability to bring on the battle whenever you know it's coming, and that inability to even put up a proper, even in modern warfare, that inability to put up an actual physical fight, because war, it's so remote now. I mean, very rarely, you're seeing it in Ukraine once again, but very rarely in modern warfare do soldiers see each other's faces, right? It's all like it's artillery and it's missiles and it's so impersonal. And I think that back in the old days, when even in Napoleonic warfare, I mean, soldiers were marching, they were out on the battlefield. They saw the enemy, they saw the destruction. And even before that, whenever you had swords and shields and bows and arrows, it was even more personal. I mean, it was visceral, right? Not just visceral. I mean, it was literally visceral and metaphorically visceral at both at the same time. But nowadays, people are they're pinned into this building or behind these trenches, and it's so remote, so far away. You're shooting mortars, you're shooting very far away, and you may be able to see some silhouettes, but it's so impersonal, and I think that creates a lot of stress, a lot of unnatural stress. Not to say that war is natural, but I guess within war, if there were to be a natural way of war, it's more like just freedom, like Braveheart style. That seems more natural. But of course, in the spiritual sense as well, in the metaphorical sense in your life, if you know something's coming, you're just like, bring it on already. Don't delay. Bring it on so I can just get through it and be through it on the other side a little quicker, or not. Mm. Oh my God, like literally God, not in vain. Oh my God, prosperity and adversity alike furnish us with excuses for neglecting thee. Yes. Yep. Yep. If we're doing well, we're prosperous, we have excuses aplenty to not serve God and to neglect Him. If we're in adversity and everything's against us, we have excuses aplenty to keep from serving Him. We have to fight those excuses and overcome them no matter what our situation. How dreadful is the conflict of superior intellect and a burning heart, with the perfect mediocrity of the characters and circumstances they are generally doomed to live with. The greater strength we exhibit, we feel we are more and more paralyzed by the weakness of our enemies. Our very energy becomes our bitterest enemy, as it fights in vain against the impregnable fortress of total vacuity. It is in vain we assail a foe who neither knows our language or uses our weapons. I think what we see here is a description of Christian apologetics versus woke culture. We're not speaking the same language for sure. We're not using the same weapons. And the woke ideology, it is so vacuous. It's so empty. It's vapid to the extreme. And it has this certain proponents of it can give it a nice air of intellectuality. They can give it a nice air of smartness. But whenever you see a very intelligent Christian apologist attack that, it's so clear how empty and blown, full of hot air, even the most intellectual sounding arguments for woke culture is. And it's almost as if the very emptiness of woke culture, it's draining it's draining the power almost out of the, it's draining the potency out of the very potent arguments and views of Christianity and of common sense, even on a secular level. It's like you can't, you're arguing with a person's feelings, and how can you do? You can't do that. But that's how they put it forth. That's kind of the situation that they put you in. It's like you say, oh well, I think this is not an accurate point of view because of this and because of this and because of this, and then they say, well, I feel that you feel this way because this feeling and this, that's not really anything you can argue with. You can't argue against somebody's feelings. You can only argue against somebody's thoughts. But if they have no thoughts that are informing or at least adjoined to their feelings, well then there's nothing to even talk about. There's no even conversation to be had. Feelings talk. Okay. Feelings. I'm almost done. Feelings. Talking with feelings, like I mentioned in another video, it devolves into just animal grunts and groans, and it's like barks, and it's just animal sounds. It's no longer human conversation. It's no longer an exchange of ideas. It's just grunts and groans and screams and belches and squeals and all that stuff. If it's just feelings versus feelings. In a morbid state of heart, we cannot bear truth. The falsehood that intoxicates us for a moment is worth more than the truth that would disenchant us for a life. I hate him because he tells me the truth, is the language natural to the human mind. Yep. How we are definitely experiencing that more and more as time goes on. And last quote, perhaps that is the last word that quits the lips of those who love. Right? Perhaps. That the word perhaps kind of betrays a distancing from someone or some idea that you once loved. Perhaps. Because love is poignant. Love is pointed. It is direct. And it is strong. And if you just, something happens and you say, well, perhaps, the ambivalence behind that expression of that word perhaps, it's telling of that lover waving the white flag and sounding the retreat to withdraw from the battlefield of love. Okay, well, that went a lot longer than I intended, but whatever. That's what's going to happen every time. So I hope you enjoyed Melmoth the Wanderer, classic Gothic novel by Charles Maturin. It was a pleasure to bring these quotes to you. I love talking about this. Sometimes I would just go through these books on my own and review quotes that I had underlined in the past. So it's a great pleasure to be able to do this on YouTube, and I'm thankful to any and all who watch these or any part thereof. So I will try to put out another video this upcoming week. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do, but I will try to make it shorter this time. All right. Peregrine Prude, out.